Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of RE134, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Unmasked, written by JeremiahHellRider. The cold was the first thing I felt after opening my eyes. It sent shivers down my spine. The blank metal walls of the room were just as I'd left them before bed. The room had a distinct serenity to it. Here, my little universe had me, the bed, and freezing cold. No worries, no hopes, no future or past. Sadly, I was already corrupted by the twisted universe outside. I would go mad if I were to stay here any longer. Not that it mattered, as I was already insane as my kin can get. With the thoughts from my latest hallucination behind me, I stood up and shambled towards the door, the cold ever stronger. Sadly, I was too rash. Only after taking my first step outside did I remember my neighbor who enjoys late-hour visits to the station's group gatherings. There was no escape now. Trying to avoid him would only make things worse. He was halfway to the right side elevator when we encountered. I squeezed my claws as he turned towards me. Coward, parasite, leech! These were just a few of the insults the old war veteran had launched at me. I could have told him to stop. I could have reported him. But what is the word of a sick-in-the-head fool versus a decorated war hero? There were victims of the conflict and industrial accidents here at the asylum, all taken care of by our collective. To him, madness was just another lie one told itself to get out of responsibility. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I was just lazy. But wouldn't that, too, confirm the validity of my sickness? Regardless, as the veteran's sour glances turned into visible anger, I held myself together for the incoming barrage of humiliation. He opened his mouth, but no strike came forward. Instead, I heard light footsteps coming from behind me. When I turned around to look, and the culprit of the interruption came into my view, I froze. At that very moment, every scale of my body turned to stone, and every thought I had dissolved into dust. It took what felt like a decade for the human to leave the elevator. With each step, it took time slowed to such an extent that I felt like the universe ended and started again. The mere moments it took for it to pass by me and knocked on the door a few rooms up the corridor was almost longer than my whole life before that point. As the moments passed and the sound of the knocks echoed through the corridor, I got a clearer image of it. From the loose shoelace on its foot to the out-of-place heron in the head, but most importantly, the mask. Only when the door opened and one cheerful kin of mine let the human in did I manage to leave my paralyzed state. I tried to hold myself together as the usual emotions brought on by humans ran its course. A more distinct sense of madness, fear, grief, and a pinch of anger. And finally, curiosity. All the feelings brought on by those creatures and their godforsaken masks. The mask was meant to keep the likes of us safe from the visage of the horrors that supposedly lie beneath it. The mask hiding whatever emotions or complexion a human could have. The mask, which under its plastic surface, covered with alien symbols and colors, held supposed horrors so potent that my kin fear to even be in its presence, to the point where humans hiding themselves had become simple courtesy. It didn't help me, however. In fact, it simply drove me further into fear. The mask hurt me and soothed my pains. It fed my madness and brought me closer to inner peace. The veteran, who had been standing firmly with his head raised as if expecting an enemy charge, spoke up after the human as it shut the door behind itself. "Look at that wit who calls us kin. Companion to a human? I would expect that from a confused loser like you." And he just confided in me. Perhaps I wasn't as unapproachable as I thought I was. Regardless, the display in my favor as a veteran skipped today's verbal beating, surely to save it up for another day. I quickly slipped into the elevator the human took as the veteran staggered towards the other side of the corridor. I made my way to the lobby of the apartments and recorded my time of exit on a terminal by the door. I could finally have a few hours of distraction outside. Normally, breathing in the filtered air, freshly pumped from the life support sector, always gave me a small sense of freedom. But today, that madness was too strong. On top of that, my body hurt more than usual. With each step I took, my legs felt heavier and heavier. My neck was always stiff from the cold, but now even my shoulders felt frozen. The hours at the logistics office didn't help at all. Taking care of boxes all day was sadly the only job I was capable of with my current sickness and set of abilities. Judging from the dark sky above, it was midday. At this time, the blue star of our solar system would be shining above the red-hot plains of Wood-El, which we were orbiting. As such, it was necessary to turn on the carbon obscurum curtains above the station's glass dome, lest we get fried up by the heat. In a few hours, the large halls and workspaces around the station would come to life as the star shined into the station, bright enough to warm our bodies, but not so warm that we burn. And as always, when the sun reached its peak, we would all retreat for the rest as the curtains closed. Not me, however. I was responsible for keeping the logistics office running at the dark hours. Who better to run the graveyard shift but the insane weirdo? Just like every night, I started by wandering aimlessly through the dimly lit and sparsely populated corridors. But of course, one could never spend hours on end without any objective. Soon, ideas were taking shape in my mind. Perhaps a visit to the office for a quick inspection, or I guess I could... I would perhaps like to visit the archives. There is always something interesting to see there, like the writings on No. I quickly turned my gaze towards the small private shops lining the main corridor of Sector B. Gachot Core, Soylent Green, Hessel Al Pasta Delicacies, Dalton Baked Paste. Wouldn't be better if we spread out all these identical places instead of putting them all in the same corridor. No one likes walking 20 minutes to just eat some paste, and I don't think having loud customers next to your apartments would be fun. I wish we talked about this madness at the year's convention instead of whether to let the Zarkrans in again. In fact, I could just take a walk to the convention center and hear the new gossip around, but there might be Hey, I could visit the foundry. They have metal craft groups today. It would be so much fun making a mess of the metal sheets again and reminding myself of just how much of I guess I could try my chance with the writers of Sector F. Yes, after all, it is so much fun to embarrass myself. Or maybe even... I froze. Fear gripped me as I realized my mistake. Foreign symbols, line stall signs, incomprehensible speech came from half-open windows. The sights brought on by tens of cultures clashed against the brutalist architecture of the collective station. I was in the alien quarter. My sleepless nights were spent planning for this moment, but now all of it was meaningless. I was stuck in the wolf's den, and only the strength of my own 2 feet was going to pull me out of this one. I looked around to see which way I had come from, but obviously, I was too distracted by thoughts to remember that. Next, I looked at the corners leading back to my sector. Signs were placed in front of walkways to lead unfortunate ones like me. To Sector D, no, through there. To Admin, either here. To Dock C, no. To Terran Trade Goods, either this way. Once again, I've been too fast and careless. I was now face to face with the storefront of a human shop. Glass displays filled with masks of various sizes, shapes, and colors. Despite lacking a face behind them, they still had the same effect on me. I was truly petrified. I hated the masks. They made me feel better than I would ever be, and I hated them. I was stuck as before. The earlier encounter had hardened my nerves, but the sight of the masks was still enough to stick me in place. I felt almost dizzy as the madness fully gripped me. I could no longer resist. Both in body and in mind, I gave in. Luckily for me, I was weak, and even though my mind could surely suffer some more, my body was not made of the same material. Soon, I was on the ground, gasping for breath. I could only drag myself to the side of a trash container as to hide while the effects passed. I was not going to have another session of the Urgash treatment again. If I let the collective down once more, I can never live with myself ever again. The humiliation alone was enough to break someone. The only thing left to do was close my eyes for rest. Enough excitement had been had. It was time to head back to the office. That's when an unfamiliar set of sounds came behind me, followed by my own translation device's interpretation. "Hey, are you okay?" There was no time to think. A response was necessary. I gave out the most cookie-cutter sentence that came to my mind. "I am in adequate condition. Thank you for your consideration." A moment passed as my response came through, and then it answered. "I believe I recognize your voice. Do you work at the logistics office of Sector B? I think I heard your voice at the booth while picking up my friend's imports." I was too tired to react, so the only thing to do was to grab the side of the trash can and rise. As I did so, every bone in my body hurt immensely. Finally, I managed to turn around and look straight at the rune-covered mask facing me. The pain on my back went from annoyed to painful as my shocked body hit the ground once more. The mask was almost romantic, almost sexual. I couldn't decide whether I hated it or myself more. Footsteps came rushing as I rolled around on the metal tiles. Harsh hands started pulling me as I gasped for breath. Indistinctive chatter from many subjects filled my ears. The translation device had already given up on understanding this mess of speech, so I did the same. Unfamiliar corridors were passed as we finally reached the front of a local clinic. I tried to protest at first, fearing that the collective would write me up for this, but my cries were mute as I was carried into a room while one sleepy kin of mine followed. I tried apologizing for interrupting her sleep, but only whimpers came from my mouth. Finally, my perilous journey came to an end, and I was placed on the soft surface of a hospital bed. When I looked back to see the doctor, she wasn't there. Instead, 3 humans stood in their place. My heart could take no more. Hallucinations reigned in as darkness came. Wild beasts tore me piece by piece as I ran for some peace. How dare I occupy this soul, deserving not a piece? The cold was the first thing I felt after opening my eyes. It sent shivers down my spine. The metal walls in the room were just as I'd left them before bed. The room had a distinct serenity to it. Here my little universe had me, the bed, and freezing cold. No worries or hopes, no future or past. However, I had been given a purpose. A note hung on the northern wall of my room. Sector E, Corridor 2, Hall 14, the South Side Pit Stop, 49th Major Cycle. As the memory of last night flowed back to me, I started to realize the weight of my responsibility. Encouraged by the drugs the doctor had pumped into me, I had agreed to meet again my human saviors. Otherwise, the doctor wouldn't have believed my story about food poisoning. I lied back and looked at the metal ceiling as plans of escape rolled in my mind. Self-harm for a forced visit back to the doctor. Creating an artificial situation at the office as to make myself occupied. Suicide? Just lying here, waiting? Coward, parasite, leech, the words spoken by the veteran echoed in my mind. I had chosen to be treated. I had chosen to keep going for a hope of recovery. I wanted to function the way my kin had to. I had chosen this path in life. My madness be damned, I was going to that human place in any case. With enthusiasm, I marched towards the door and opened it with force, only to be greeted by the veteran leaving for work just as I was. Too rash, every time. After the conclusion of today's verbal abuse, with some leftovers from yesterday thrown in, I was out in the corridors. The few people like me with night jobs were scrambling around as they went to their workspaces. I also joined them. The number of kin around me fluctuated as I passed through corridors of various importance. But after a few more minutes of walking and an elevator ride, I was at the warehouse. I clocked in at the front gate and made my way towards the usual workstation. After the many months spent here, my work was almost mechanical. The robots around me, who followed commands without question, seemed more sentient than me. With this cooperation between me and my problem-solving mind and their efficient limbs, soon all the crates which were piled up tonight were put in place. Now, it was time to do the visitor management. With a higher than usual enthusiasm, I entered the employee's booth as kin and alien alike lined up. Lucky for me, humans rarely came to this side of the station. Soon, there were boxes, bags, and crates flowing out of the warehouse as I handed them out to their respective owners. Shopkeepers received merchandise. Mercenaries got reinforced and locked gun crates. Regular kin were handed personal items from loved ones. That's when I noticed an unusual sight at the back of the line. After a moment of hesitation, the reality of the situation became clear. Without a moment's notice, I shut down the panel connecting my booth to the outside and slapped the out-of-order sign. The movement of my robot friends came to a halt. There was nothing else to do. No one was coming to save me. One mistake could ruin me. There were two options: failure or action. I rushed to the office and entered the empty infirmary. The medical cabinet stood closed. I rushed over and pulled its handle. Locked. The security camera was facing me. Was it turned on? Action. I grabbed a pair of scissors and concentrated on the kin-made lock. I may have been a parasite on society, but I was at least a resourceful parasite. Lockpicking was just one of the skills I had learned to make myself feel actually useful. Soon enough, the lock was on the ground and I was rummaging through the various medicines and drugs in the cabinet. My mind was racing between thoughts as I searched. Xenophol, camera, brake, mask, Tranidol, camera, septical acid, mask, camera, mask, camera. But finally, behind the bandages, I found it. Despesadol, my old friend. I passed around the little syringe between my claws. No hesitation. I injected myself on the right arm, just as I'd done countless times before. Pain, run, mask, mad, Urgash, camera, camera, camera. I looked back at the camera overlooking me. Was it turned on or not? No guards had broken in here yet, so I was in the clear. Or maybe not. No time. I ran back to the booth just as the drug kicked in. The floor slipped under me. I managed to seat myself on the chair as the panel connected me to the still waiting people outside. One elderly kin of mine came asking for a crate from the capital. I sent it to him. An alien I didn't recognize the species of asked for frozen goods from a far-off planet. I gave it to him, I think. Faint sounds of police sirens were in the air. They were coming for me. Then the one came.
Hey, back up on your 2 feet, I see. Normally I go to Sector D warehouses, but I just wanted to see you.
Indeed. How may I assist you?
You are this cold to me after all we've been through at the foreign quarter.
I pulled myself away from the panel as to hide the sounds of my teeth grinding against another. Apologies, sir. I get carried away while at work. My claws were shaking. I hid them away from the view of the panel.
Save up your energy for tonight. Nat is going to be the one carrying you away then, if you are coming, of course.
Indeed. I will visit this establishment.
Well, we will be waiting for you. Now, can you get me my crate? It should have had the ID of...
I blindly obliged as he took his crate and walked away. The rest of the hours were spent mindlessly taking orders while the drug did its job. After almost 120 minor cycles, I was done. But looking back at it, I felt like only a minute had passed. I had to sit there, waiting long after the last person had left. After a session of puking at the bathroom and putting back the infirmary lock, I made my way towards the alien quarter at the given address. Unlike my last visit, the streets were crowded with persons from across the cosmos. But my kin still made up the majority. Normally, I would lose my mind amongst this many people, but perhaps because of my recent experiences, or perhaps because I was too tired from the drug, I could bear the crowds. I even managed to avoid the few humans at the peripheries of my vision. Hall 11, Hall 12, Hall 13, Hall 14. I was here. Now what? Just then I realized that I had no plans for what to do once inside. I couldn't be high for hours without anyone noticing. I simply stood there, looking at the doors as my watch inched closer to the 49th major cycle. There was less people outside, walking now. I concentrated on solutions. Ideas, absurd and practical, crossed my mind as I brainstormed, but no clear solution was found. How could I, the one who can't even face a single human without destroying his brain, could enter a hall filled with them. But I did. Many people always act irresponsible and get away with it, so why couldn't I do the same? One foot after another, I walked across the corridor and stood at the front of the doors. These were the gates, either to temporary freedom or endless punishment. I slipped inside as quiet as a ghost. The pub had a unique smell to it, rotten but fresh. Faces greeted me. No, that's wrong. Emotions greeted me. Were they happy, sad, shocked? I didn't know, but they had feelings. All my fears flew away while I slipped and fell on the ground as my racing heart suddenly slowed down. I had seen it. I'd seen them behind the mask. It was beautiful. It was ugly, but it spoke to me. I saw myself in those faces, always hiding under the masks. One of them came rushing at me as I struggled to get up. Was that anger on its face, or maybe confusion? It didn't matter. I just wanted to see the emotion. The human came and started pulling me up. Just then, it started putting a mask over its face. No, this could not stand. Being irresponsible had worked once, and it could work again. Before the human could put the mask on, I grabbed its hand and pulled it away. No, it's not necessary. Emotion. The human's facial features changed as I spoke. Every little movement of muscles sparked joy and interest in me.
If you're going to be fine with it.
Yes, please. Let us converse as suggested. Soon I was sitting at a chair, too tall for me, with a glass of water, while the humans conversed. I don't remember what we said to each other. I think they thought that I hated humans. It didn't matter to me anyhow. Their faces were what mattered. Every mimic and every muscle movement felt more complex and illustrative than 1,000 words. Seeing all the different expressions on their faces was like discovering new colors. Every moment I found new ways to understand them and myself. As I walked back home after that long night of conversation, I felt mad as ever, but now I could describe my madness. Not with words, but with the faces. I tried to copy them as I walked through the desolate corridors. I was free to suffer, but also free to be content. The hallucinations came again as I slipped into bed. Fighting with your glass shield, Pyrrhic victory on the field. Celebrate, your tide no more. Weep, for blood and tears you will wield. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.